Thank you, everyone who's been on this journey with us. It's hard to believe that we started 6 weeks ago in what was a totally different world. And it's nice to have had some consistency in learning, some consistency in community. And it does feel a little bit odd to say that I haven't met most of you in person, but there are certain faces that are coming up again and again. I'm like, oh, he laughed at my joke last week. Rob is back. Hi, Rob. And nice to truly welcome everyone. And this series started with emphasis on Mussar and of personal development and character development. And I think that it's only appropriate that we conclude with the trait of authenticity, which I really think will be a trait that ties a lot of what we discussed together. That it's great that we did all this learning, but on a practical level, where are we moving forward with it? So the structure of the class will be similar to the previous 5, an exploration of the particular Jewish value and trait through text. Where do we find it? What does it mean? What does it stand for? And then concluding with a reflective activity to tie everything back together. So let us begin. So with the trait of authenticity, I actually researched this one a little bit differently than the other traits, because I had a particular phrase in mind that I remembered learning growing up, which was the phrase toho koboro, which was the phrase that your inside should match your outside. And I started researching, well, where did I actually hear that phrase before? In what context? What does it mean? And why is it something that's so valued and so important? And ended up down a rabbit hole and discovered all sorts of fun things along the way. And I'm inviting you on that journey with me today. So the phrase toho koboro, that inside should be like your outside, that authenticity is something that should be valued, is actually first cited in the Torah, as one could imagine. Sharing the link to Sefaria. Its origin is from a verse in Shemot, chapter 25, verse 11, and related to the construction of the Mishkan, the construction of the tabernacle. And that the way that the Aron, that the ark was constructed, was that it was overlaid with pure gold, overlaid inside and out, and make upon it a gold molding round about. That the ark was constructed with gold on both the outside and on the inside. And the questions the commentators ask is, well, why does it have to be on the outside and the inside? Only one part of that is going to be shown. What's the symbolism behind having gold both on the outside and the inside of this particular object? And the Gemara in Yuma, which is included in the link that I posted, says, "Mibayit umichutz titzapenu." The verse states concerning the ark, from within and from without you shall cover it, meaning cover it in gold. Amar Rava states, Kol Talmid Chacham, any Torah scholar, she'ein toho koboro, eino Talmid Chacham. That any Torah scholar whose inside isn't like their outside can't be considered a Torah scholar. And that's the initial source. And we'll take it now in the reverse. Therefore, in order to be a Torah scholar, your inside needs to be like your outside. You need to be consistent in your thought and your actions. You can't just publicly state, I fear that I fear God. You actually have to live that way as well. And the Gemara actually continues and gives lots of different examples of how awful it would be if you presented yourself as a Torah scholar, if you didn't live consistently on the inside like you presented yourself on the outside. So far, so good, so far so simple, nothing particularly revolutionary. Makes sense. You should be authentic. We have a proof text. Everything seems simple. Authenticity, yay, this is positive. You have your life on the inside like the outside. And we could have a whole fascinating conversation about what's the cost when we don't live on the inside like the outside, or why is it so important that our role models act consistently, and where do we act consistently in our own lives and where don't we act consistently in our own lives. And we might have that conversation at the end. But when I was doing my research, I found a source that seemed to contradict that. And we're gonna put that back in the chat, and I'm actually gonna share my screen for this one because it's a bit of a story. Chrome, there we go, share screen, beautiful. Okay, so little bit of background as we scroll up to the source. So, Rabban Gamliel was head of the Beit Midrash. He was head of the study hall, and he got into an argument with Rabbi Yehoshua, and apparently didn't treat him respectfully over the course of that argument. And as a result, they made the decision that he had to step down as head of the study hall. And they appointed a new head of the study hall, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. And it was taught that on the day that they removed Rabban Gamliel from his position and appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in his place, there was also a fundamental change in the general approach of the study hall, as they dismissed the guard at the door and permission was granted to the students to enter. So apparently when Rabban Gamliel was in charge, there was a guard at the door who made sure that only the appropriate students could enter. So who are the students that were allowed to enter? So Rabban Gamliel would proclaim and say, any student who's inside, his thoughts and his feelings are not like his outside, meaning that their tocho was not kaboro, like we just said. His conduct and his character traits were lacking, will not enter the study hall. So Rabban Gamliel had this policy: unless you were living an authentic life, unless your insides match your outsides, your thoughts match your actions, you weren't allowed into the study hall. That's what was required for entrance. And we might have thought that based upon what we just learned, that was a sound policy. It said that a Talmid Chacham, a Torah scholar, could only be someone whose inside matches the outside. But the Gemara reports back something very different. The Gemara relates, on that day, several benches were added to the study hall to accommodate the numerous students. Rabbi Yochanan said, one said 400 benches were added, one said 700 benches were added. Either way, literally hundreds of more students were entering the study hall than came from beforehand. And Rabbi Gamliel was disappointed. Perhaps, heaven forbid, I prevented people from Israel from learning Torah. So he had a dream that white jugs filled with ashes, alluding to the fact that the additional students were, I love this translation, worthless idlers. And the Gemara comments, this is not the case, but that dream was shown to him to ease his mind so he would not feel bad. So if I were to ask you, what does the Gemara think about his policy? What would you say? What judgment does the Gemara seem to come to about his policy? Feel free, as always, to pop it into the chat. Again, so Uri says that his policy was too restrictive.
Deb?
I think it says that everybody deserves a fair chance, that it's something to strive for, but sometimes it takes a long time, and that shouldn't keep somebody from learning.
Okay, so Deb's already getting to the resolution of how do you get the two sources together, which is exactly what I was going to say. So thank you, Deb. Lori says, you need to learn so you can reach the goal. Excellent. Francis asks, how could he know? Great. So I think what Deb said and what Lori presented is how you actually synthesize the two sources. Because there seems to be this apparent conflict that Toho Kabor is the ultimate aspiration. And Rabbi Gamliel said, you can't enter unless you're already there. And just to make it a little bit deeper, the Mei Shiloach comments, well, how could the guard actually tell whether or not their inside was like their outside? And one explanation given is that it was actually an angel, which effectively means no one could possibly know. And the second explanation, which is even more fascinating, is that there wasn't a guard there at all. But the mere principle of stating you have to be at this level in order to enter scared off people from coming in the first place. And that the statement effectively served as a guard. And once they removed the head of the Beit Midrash, once they removed the statement, now people weren't scared to enter anymore. Because you have to imagine, who were these 400 or 700 students? They were all people who wanted to learn, but felt that they weren't up to the standard of being able to enter. And once the standard was shifted, then they were able to show up. But presumably, Rabbi Gamliel, he was head of the Beit Midrash, so he was a big rabbi. You have these other statements, and there's even more. Famous one from the Rambam in Mishnah Torah from Maimonides. V'lo yeh echad b'peh ve'echad b'lev, ela toho kaboro. V'heinyan shebalev hua davar shebapeh. That he shall not be one thing with his mouth and another with his heart, but his inner and outer being must be the same, for the subject of the heart is matter of the mouth. So clearly, this is a core principle that we believe in. But the question becomes, how is it applied? And as Deb said and as Lori said, perhaps this is the ultimate aspiration. But in order to get there, well, that's where you have to actually enter and show up and learn. And that perhaps the mistake that Rabbi Gamliel made was saying you have to be at this level in order to start, when the reality is we share the goal of wanting to get there, but unless you're allowed entrance, then how do you expect anyone to do the work in order to get there? Similar to what, I know it's not Mark who just texted me because it was someone else who was on Mark's tablet, Tiferet, just messaged me, the initial expectation was unrealistic. Who is totally authentic? When are we in a state of not having to be more reflective? And now our false words create reality. Our words need to acknowledge that we are imperfect. From Deb, it sort of sounds like Rabbi Gamliel was a bit pretentious. So I'll play with that word a little bit and say purely idealistic, that they had their ideals. And then was there someone who wanted to unmute?
Yes, Deborah.
I was just thinking about how this could apply today. And it was just touching me that there are some of our fellow Jews who don't feel comfortable walking into a synagogue. And it's kind of sad because they feel that because they don't have the background, they feel very self-conscious walking into that synagogue, even just to say Kaddish for somebody if they haven't been there for a long time. So I think that I'm thinking that this is something that we need to work on even today to really get the communication across that all Jews are welcome in the synagogue regardless of their background.
Yeah, I'm in total agreement with that. And not only that, Deborah, but so is the Gemara. Because if you continue through this particular piece, it says that day, there was no halacha whose ruling was pending in the study hall that they did not explain. So you might have thought, 400, 700 people just showed up. This is going to lead to a decrease in quality. While the Gemara actually says, no, every single question was able to be answered, even with the increase of people. And this is going to get to Deborah's point explicitly, what was one of the questions that they explored that day? So one of the questions they explored that day was that Yehuda, who was a Ger Ammoni, a convert from the tribe of Ammon, and little background, because of the way that the Moabites and Ammonites treated the Jews on their way into Israel, there's a specific law that we would not accept converts only from these two particular tribes. So on that day, Yehuda, who was a Ger from Ammon, asked, what is my legal status? Am I allowed to enter the congregation? Which seems to be the exact question Deborah was talking about. And Amar lo Rav Gamliel said, consistent to his perception of pure ideology, no, asur talavo bekahal, you're forbidden to enter the congregation, because that's what the law says. Amar lo Rabbi Yehoshua, mutar talavo bekahal. Rabbi Yeshua, who he had this initial conflict with, no, he is allowed to come. And Rabbi Yeshua explains, because Sancherev mixed up all the different nations, we don't actually know who's from where anymore. And since we don't actually know, you're allowed to come in and enter the congregation. Again, it's coming back to those same principles of the conversation. Are we judging people upon this pure ideal? Asur means forbidden. So are we judging people upon this ideal that we have to know for certain you're allowed in, and we have to know for certain that you're living an authentic life in order to get started, in order to learn, which is Rabban Gamliel's position? Or is it like the Beit Midrash eventually decides, no, are you motivated enough to enter? Do you want to join? And as Rabbi Yeshua says, we're going to give you the benefit of the doubt to enter and to get started. And it actually continues that Rabban Gamliel, it turns out, was purely of the Beit Midrash, was purely of the study hall, as to Rabbi Yehoshua, who is a blacksmith in addition to being a rabbi and a scholar, which raises an interesting question of, well, how might that have shaped their perspective and approaches to inclusivity as it relates to learning. So Tiferet asks, can we expand the invitation to now only Jews are welcome, but all people who want to learn and grow? So again, I think that's a matter of what are people authentically searching from, and what are their motivations for showing up? And I think our learning community is a good example of that. I've gotten a couple of very interesting emails from people who've been coming to this class over the past 6 weeks, who they themselves are not Jewish, but were curious because they had a partner that was, and wanted to explore this aspect. And I think that when it comes to authenticity, perhaps the ideal is that my insides match my outsides, that they're gold in both regards. But how do we get there? We start with a motivation for striving and searching. Bruce said, it reminds me of Hillel and Shammai. Yes, it's very similar to the story of someone who says, can you teach me the entire Torah on 1 foot? And Shammai says no, and Hillel says, do not do unto others what you would not want done unto yourself. Again, it's not a matter of right or wrong. They're two legitimate approaches depending on what the first principles are. So from Shammai's perspective, it was, how seriously could you possibly be asking this question? How could I teach you everything on 1 foot? From Hillel, it was, okay, let me engage the best that we can. And to tie that into to our class and to our journey, well, what is our journey? And how often do we stop ourselves because we're not already where we want to be? And I can only start if I'm already at the finish line. And I think one of the main lessons of Mussar literature in general, and I think of this particular class, is the first step to starting is starting. And the authenticity might be in recognizing where am I on the inside versus where do I want to be on the outside, and now how do I make those match? And there could be different approaches to that. One approach, which is the more cognitive approach, how do I change my thoughts to match? Another approach is the more action-oriented approach. There's a phrase, "Acholrei ha'peulot nishlochim halevavot," that through changing my actions, my heart is pulled. So to pick a classic one like exercise, if I start, then I might become someone who enjoys exercise. And if I wait, I got a couple of shakes to that one. We can replace that with writing, or with painting, or with cooking, or with whatever other metaphor you prefer, Seema. Sure. So basically, where do we start? And I think, and this is a story that I like to share in the youth group context. Deb Schuback posted a "fake it until you make it." I prefer the phrase "believe it until you achieve it." Slight nuance, but I do believe that it matters. There's a famous story. Again, it's famous because I know it, and famous because I'm about to share it with you. Called the famous story of Reb Zusha. So Reb Zusha, who was a Hasidic Rebbe, famous for being righteous, and he's on his deathbed, and all his students are crowding around him, and he's crying. And his students ask him, like, "Rebbe, why are you crying? Like, you lived a righteous life. You should be excited to meet your creator. You're guaranteed a place in the world to come. Why are you crying?" And he told his students, "I'm not scared about being asked if I was Moshe Rabbeinu, if I was Moses. I'm not scared of being asked if I was Avraham, if I was Abraham. I'm scared of being asked, Reb Zusha, how come you weren't the best Reb Zusha you could be?" And that story always held so much resonance for me, because by which standard are we measuring ourselves? And that idea of authenticity, part of it is as my insides matching my outsides, but part of it also is that I'm being measured purely on my own internal yardstick. Rav Dessler has this whole concept when it comes to what is free will, that everybody has their own point of free will. And that what might be a challenge for one person is super easy for somebody else. What might be super easy for somebody else is going to be a challenge for them. And we're not judged based on how we respond to other people's challenges, but rather how we respond to our own. And if we look at all the traits that we covered over the past few weeks of compassion, of wisdom, of generosity, they're all going to apply differently in our own lives, in our own contexts. Like when we spoke about happiness, hasamech bechelko, happy with what they have, and the idea of acceptance, well, we all have different cheleks. We all have different portions. And we can go through character trait by character trait. So what I'm going to ask for the last few minutes is, if you have paper in front of you, to actually write at the top of the page, I am whatever your name is, and to write underneath that the beliefs and actions you associate with being you. What does it mean to be authentically Ann Lawson, or Kathleen Riley, or Irene Blumenkrantz? Just, who am I? And as you write, there'll probably some that you go and say, you know what, like, I'm really rocking that one. Go me. And there'll probably be some others that you write where you're like, you know what, I'm not as far along with that as I would like right now. That my actions don't necessarily line up with this core mindset and belief. Okay, what's a step I could take to get there? For people who are more mathematically inclined, you can do this as a time audit. Well, how much time do I actually spend doing these things that I think are important to me? It's also the same way you could do a time audit, you could do a monetary or budget audit. And I think that the lesson that we started this class with of who gets to enter the Beit Midrash is, am I ready to start? And that the idea of Mussar literature and the idea of the past 6 weeks that we spent together isn't I should already be here, but rather, where do I want to get to? And am I setting aside the times to get there? Like there's a Gemara that states when you go to heaven, one of the questions that you're asked is, did I set aside time to learn Torah? They didn't ask you how much you learned. It wasn't an amount question. It was well, did I set aside the time? Ditto for a blessing that we make in the morning. It's la'asok b'divrei Torah. Did I make myself busy with? Not lilmo, did I learn? That it's a process. Am I setting aside the time? Am I putting in the effort? And I think Tiferet's right, that question takes a lifetime to learn and articulate. And it's one that I think is important to remind ourselves and ask. To conclude with one final quote from Pirkei Avot that I think sums up so much of what we discussed today and in general is Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor v'lo ata ben chorin lihibatal mimena. That it's not upon you to finish all the entire work, but that also doesn't mean that you can't get started. And I think that applies both on a personal level. We're never truly done growing and developing, and that's true. And there's no finish line that we're ever going to actually get to, but that doesn't mean that we can't start. It applies on a societal level. Will whatever my individual action do really make a difference? Yes, and I can't not start, even though it just seems like I'm moving slowly. And that's why we're here. And that's really who gets access into the Beit Midrash. And I want to thank and acknowledge everyone here, Julie from My Jewish Learning, all the learners here today and over the course of the series, for entering our Beit Midrash and giving this a shot, and every week truly challenging and articulating and learning and applying back the various principles and knowledge. And even now, people are sharing, thank you, Chris, having fun learning from you all. You are all the example of chesed. Thank you so much. I'd like to draw closer to Hashem through prayer, because the prayer will improve my behavior and my chesed. I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thought to close on, that idea of prayer as encounter. As mifgash. And I think learning is truly an encounter. It's an encounter between people and souls. It's an encounter between us and the text. And it's in that encounter and in that we truly discover ourselves and discover more depth.